Hey everybody, it's EJ from eyedesyn.com, and today we are going to recreate this little, what do they call this, mini machines, and specifically the textures that are used here, and even more specifically, the glass texture here, this plasticky glass with this little haze kind of going on. So that's what we're going to be breaking down today. And these guys from Pixego from Istanbul, Turkey, are the wonderful people behind the this work. So basically, I'm going to be breaking down how you can achieve the same kind of plasticky objects, and again, specifically, going to be breaking down this hazy, cloudy kind of plastic glass. So let's jump right in here. All right, so let's go ahead and let's recreate this whole entire thing. So let's go and create a new composition. We are going to create our tube and create that kind of white tube there. Let's move this up above the floor, something like that. And let's actually add a fillet, and that's going to be important because of all the reflections and stuff we're going to have going on. That having this edge is really going to help the reflections. And while we're at it, let's increase the rotation segments to about 55. So this is our white tube. We'll shrink this down a little bit, and we'll then make a smaller version of that little green bit, just like that. That looks pretty close. And now to the little glass tubes here, these little bent glass tubes. So let's go ahead and to make those, we are going to use cylinders. That's a disc. I meant cylinder. There we go. And we're going to give this an orientation to the positive Z. We are going to kind of move this into place. Let's zero out the Y. There we go. And move this forward. And let's shrink this down just a little bit. Now, what we can do is add these little, I guess that's like a Taurus, or I'm not quite sure what those things are, but those little guys, let's make those. So we'll actually use, let's actually use another tube, and I'll just bring this down, shrink this, scale the height, and just move this down a little bit. And actually, I think I need to make this, even the cylinder, a little bit smaller. Something like that. There we go. So that's that part, and then I'll just duplicate that tube again, and that'll be the end little part there. And let's make sure our radiuses, our fillet radius, you can probably increase the radius a little bit because it looks pretty round, judging by the original image there. All right, now to bend this. So these are all the objects we need to bend. So I'm going to place them in a null, and this will be the glass bendy tube. Get a bend deformer, place in the same hierarchy as all the objects we want to bend. We'll do the fit to parent, and right on cue, we will have our object or our bend deformer not bending the right way. Never bends the right way. So we need to do a little rotation like this and a little rotation like that, and we should be bending in the right direction. So that's looking good, but we need to add more segments to our cylinder. And actually what I'm going to do is turn the caps off, so we don't need any caps on the cylinder. And give more height segments, and we're going to keep the y-axis length. So there we go. We're going to make sure this is 90 degrees. You just need to bend it 90 degrees. And let's see. Since our little Taurus guy, or our tube, is kind of bending through the floor. Just going to move this a little bit more, and you'll see that since I moved that bend deformer forward, it's now bending and distorting part of our tube. So I'm just gonna shrink this a little bit and then move this back. Let me actually get into my side view so I can see exactly where my floor is. So here's my floor, and we'll just do that, and that looks good. All right, so there's our one glass bendy tube. And actually I think I made this way too big. I think this tube's way too big compared to this one, but you know what, that's okay. We can just make these elements a little bit bigger, like so, and we fixed it. There we go, everything's all good, right as rain. Okay, so let's get this glass bendy tube, and we need to create two more. So to do that very easily, we're just going to create an instance and rotate this, put this into place like so, and then we'll duplicate that again and move it over here. And we need to again adjust our main little tubes here. Just try to align everything up, just kind of eyeballing it here, and there we go. That's looking good. So the final thing I want to do with the modeling, I'm not going to worry about any of this other stuff because I want to get to the nuts and bolts. I want to get to the meat and potatoes and start texturing this. But the one thing I do want to do is go ahead, make sure caps are off on that too. Yep. I want to go and cut a hole in this main tube right here. So this will be the white tube. White tube. Just so, because we're going to be dealing with transparent materials, so I want to just be able to see kind of like inside there, depending on your camera angle. So I don't even really know if we're going to need it specifically for this angle view, but well, let's just do it just for the heck of it. So let's see. There's our cylinder. Let's take that out, and we're going to kind of just use this cylinder as a bowl to cut out holes in that big white tube, and we just got to make sure this is lined up, not being too perfect here. So something like that, and place that there. We'll turn caps on just in case we need them. I don't think we will. But there's our white tube, there's a cylinder, and let's get our bowl. Yeah, I know people are the real, true, hardcore modelers are going to be shaming me, but you know what? Hey, bowls are there for a reason. I'm going to use it. So let's turn off our bendy tube. There we go. We got a hole. We got a hole. And now we'll just create another hole, move it over here, and you'll notice that our bowl isn't working, and that's because we got to group these two cylinders together, group, and turn back on our tubes, and we'll just put this other cylinder in this place. Let's just line that up and probably make these a little bit, increase the radius here just a little bit, and that's looking good. All right, so that's our main thingamajig, our mini machine. Let's start doing some housekeeping here. Bendy tube, main tube, this is the green tube. This is the white tube again. And what I'm going to do now is let's just create a camera. And basically what we're going to do, this is kind of the camera view they use is like a isometric kind of view here. I like to call it the Sim City camera view. So I'm just going to recreate that. So I got my camera here. I'm going to look through it, clicking the little button right there. Going to change this to parallel, and now you can see that our composition looks a lot flatter. So it kind of gets rid of that perspective, distortion, depth kind of thing. SimCity view. That's my official name for it. So let's just do like 45 and -45. Zoom in here. And the one other thing I want to do is before we start putting on any materials or anything, I want to get an environment in here just so when we start putting in reflections and stuff, it's actually going to be reflecting things. So I'm going to pull up my HDRI Studio and just leave it as the defaults right now. And actually I'm seeing we got a little gap in our tube, so let's just go into our cylinder and maybe just increase the size of our cylinder. And this is the nice thing about using instances, is because I just have to change one, and since the others are instances, we're all good. We don't have to change anything else. Okay, so I just screwed up my camera angle. There we go, back to normal. So we got our HDRI Studio rig, we got an HDR already loaded up. Now we can start applying materials, and this is going to be our white plastic material. Now, plastic materials, you know, the ones without any frills are fairly easy to make because really all you need to do is just add your Beckman or whatever one of these three you want to use, reflection channels, go into your Fresnel, and we're just going to choose dielectric, and we're going to choose plexiglass because that's kind of like a plastic. So let me make this a little bit more of a whiter plastic. And we're not going to deal with specular for these. So I'll get rid of the specular. And there's my white tube. And make sure that that's on the bool part. So now we got, let me just turn on interactive render region here so I don't have to keep rendering time and time again to see what the heck I'm doing. There we go. So we already have nice reflections due to our HDI Studio rig. There's our white plastic, and that's looking fine and dandy. I'll duplicate that, and this will be our green plastic for this little tube right here. Let me apply that to our green tube. Boom. And basically all I have to do is go into my color channel and get the kind of bluish, greenish kind of thing. And if I really wanted to, I can get creative in my reflection channel. Normally you don't want to change the color of your reflection, but sometimes what I like to do with plastics and stuff like that is, you know, change the color to something. So, you know, this is our color of our object. Sometimes I like to complement it with like a color close to it in the color wheel, so like a yellow or a blue. So let's do like a light blue kind of thing. It's just a very subtle thing, but sometimes it helps kind of make your textures a little bit more interesting. So that's our green plastic. Cool. Now we need our gray plastic for these little rings. So actually what I'll do is just duplicate my white plastic, rename it gray, and just make this gray. Easy enough. And we'll apply this to our tubes here. So this one, and that should be all of our tubes. Yep. Okay, so now we can get into the nitty gritty and add our glass texture. So for this glass texture, and it's going to be, you know, fairly more of an intense process because of the fact that we have a very specific kind of plasticky glass look. And I want to bring up the reference image again, and you really can't tell right here, but it's got a little bit of a haze, and you can really tell in this image right here. And what I mean haze is that you can't really see through this perfectly. It looks less like glass and more like a gel or something like that. So that's really the look I want to try to achieve here. So the first thing I'm going to do is turn off my color channel. I'm just going to name this plastic glass. I'm going to go to my transparency and turn on transparency. And let me actually apply this to my cylinder here first. There we go. And you're going to see nothing because we're looking right through this guy. And we're going to get, actually, let's leave the specular there. So we don't need to add reflection, because in transparency there's actually some reflection inside of this actual module or in this channel. And you're not going to see it until we start messing with this refraction here. So we have all these refraction presets, and these really come in handy. And again, just like I did with the Fresnel on the reflections on the plastic objects, I'm going to use plexiglass preset here as well. And now you'll start to see some reflection going on. And again, the reflection can be controlled with this Fresnel reflectivity right here. So you see a little bit of reflection, and actually what I want to do, now that I can notice it, is change our background to this blue, kind of baby blue color. So I'm going to go to my HDR Studio. I'm going to go to my floor gradient and make it that kind of babyish blue, like that. And then I'll just create a new knot over here and make this like a slight gradient. Actually need a bit darker blue to match the original, or I can just use my color picker and grab that blue from the actual image. That's a lot easier. There we go. Okay, so we got our blue background. What we need to start doing now, before I mess with our texture anymore, and actually the one thing I wanted to point out is this refraction, how we get this nice bending and distortion of all of our objects in here as light's hitting our glass and it's being distorted and bent. And as we see it through the camera, that's causing the distortion. You can really tell that that's what's going on in this original image, and especially right here too. So we're getting this nice little bend of all of our elements or objects in our scene. So that's all caused by the refraction. So let's see. Let's add some lights. So before we go any further, I'm going to create a couple lights. So this will be our main light, this main area light. This will be, this will have an area shadow. Before I go any further, I'm going to change our renderer to physical, just because it's going to look way prettier. And let's just place our light here, and you can see that if we follow the shadows to try to see where our light is, our light's kind of going to be up over here. So I'm going to do the same thing and place that up over to the corner, like so. Move this up, kind of angle this, and I'm going to give this, we got a really harsh shadow right now, but we'll deal with that later. Let's add a fall off. We'll get inverse square because it's the physically accurate one, and then we'll just adjust this fall off by adjusting this little sphere guide. And you can also tell that in our original image we have a little yellow hue or orangish hue, like the sun's kind of hitting it. So we'll just give our light a little bit of an orangish hue as well to try to get that into our image as well. So that's looking pretty close. Okay, so that's our one light. And again, this is a very harsh shadow. So what you want to do is start filling in this scene with other lights. So the one thing you can do is add a fill light, or a rim light actually. We'll make this a rim light, and we'll just bring this over behind our object. This will add just like a nice rim halo kind of thing. Let's actually bring our main light down, bring our rim light down a little bit as well. And maybe this is a blue hue, so we'll like mix and match our colors. And actually, I don't want a shadow on this. The only light I want to have a shadow is this main one, just so we don't have too many shadows going on. Let me just adjust that. That's looking a little bit better. Okay, so here's our rim light. Looking good. So you can see that our just adding that extra light, this rim light, helps to fill in that shadow so it's not so harsh. And let's add one more light, and this will be our overhead light. Overhead. There we go. And zero out our rotation. We'll just place this right up above our object. So there it is. And this will be kind of like a sky. So we'll give this a slight blue hue as well. And you can tell that our image is still fairly dark. And what I'm going to do to kind of fill that in is to add a fill light, like an ambient light, just to brighten up our image overall. And you can do this two ways. If you have the HDR Studio rig, they built in a fill light in here already. But if you don't have HDR Studio rig, shame on you, get it. But if you don't, you can still do an ambient light by just picking a light. And in the general tab, we have this ambient illumination. If you check that on, that's going to apply a flat light. And you can see that it just flattens our lighting immediately. But usually you just want to bring this down to a low level like 15 and maybe even more, like 25. If I do like a comparison, you can see that it just brightens up our image ever so slightly. So I'm just going to do that within the HDR Studio rig. Maybe bring this fill to 30 and maybe give again, so this is going to kind of act like a sky. So if it's a blue sky, we'll get a little blue tint. Crank this up a little more. Actually, let's go to our main light and we'll crank that up a little bit. And maybe the overhead too. Just want to lighten up our scene. Let's see. Get our main and increase the radius of the fall off. And that's looking a lot better. That's looking closer. All right. Looking good. So the next thing we can do is, so we got this glass texture, but it looks just like plain glass. We need to get that hint of that this is kind of like frosty, like a frosty or gel kind of material. So what we can do is go into our glass material here, and we can do a couple things. We can increase the absorption distance and give this a hue, and you can see that what that's going to do is kind of, as light hits it, it's going to absorb that color depending on how, what the length is here. The lower the length, the darker our glass is going to be, the less light is going to be transmitted through there. And the result's going to be that hue color. So we can have this maybe be a yellowish or a bluish, maybe bluish. So that's just going to be a very slight thing. So you can see slight blue hue there. That's not really helping with the cloudiness. The one thing that's really going to help with the cloudiness is you could turn on a color channel here. If we bring down the transparency a little bit, you can see a little bit of that color channel peeking through, and it's kind of giving a cloudy kind of look. But the one thing that's really going to help is subsurface scattering, and I'm going to load that up in the luminance channel. And what that's going to do is, you know, subsurface scattering is perfect for, there we go, is perfect for gel-like materials. Again, we have all these custom presets here, and I'm just going to start out with like skim milk. And even though this isn't skim milk, I'm just going to change this color to, again, something more blue. And this path length is going to work a lot like the absorption distance, where depending on how much this length is, depends on how much light actually gets through. So you can see that not much light's getting through with the path distance very low, and with the path distance fairly high, more light's kind of transmitting through. So that's 20 centimeters. Let's actually go and check to make sure. So our cylinder radius is 35. So 20 should be okay. 20 should be just fine. Let's turn on fast evaluation with the multiple, and in the single, I'm going to enable that. And when I enable that, you're going to start to see a little bit of cloudiness kind of poke through here. And what we want to do is adjust this phase function. You can see how this kind of works in this preview. So you can see that this part of the cube is kind of blocking out the light. And if I switch this over to the other side, that side is getting more of the light. So right now I'm just going to try to see what looks best. And I think it's going to be maybe a negative phase, probably. So let's wait for this to update, because I want that kind of haziness to poke through. And let's see, maybe if I add more color, or maybe ease up on the transparency, if that's going to help bring some of that haziness in there. So it's just kind of giving and taking here. Maybe make this a little bluish. And again, we can adjust this phase function. And another thing is going to be this path length. So if we decide that maybe this isn't quite enough haze, we can always increase the strength. Increase the strength of our surface scattering, and you can see that now we're really getting a lot more of that haze in there. Okay. And again, adjusting this phase function. So you can see how this changes in the preview. And you can see we're losing that haze with the positive function. So just kind of tweak this. I'm really not going to mess with any of these other tabs, but I think that looks a lot better. Another thing we can do is go into the specular channel here, and there is definitely some kind of specular hit happening on these objects. You can see just a subtle bit here. So what I'm going to do is, and it's a sharp one, so I'm just going to adjust the specular, see how that helps. And it's just very slight, right along the edge here. We can maybe give this a yellow hue. See how that looks. Again, we can always adjust how much you're seeing through the glass by adjusting the brightness of the transparency, and we're getting a lot more of that subsurface scattering going on. And you can really see how this is kind of taking a hit on my render here. Subsurface scattering. So we can kind of bring down the sample density, increase the threshold to try to speed all that up. So already we're getting a nice hazy, plasticky kind of thing going on. Increase the path length, maybe increase the strength even more. And let's actually go, and for the heck of it, let's change our HDR Studio. So right now it's a 3 softbox studio, which is fairly plain. So that's just something like this. Let's actually use a real image. I'm going to use these commercial locations, and I'm going to use this grassy field with sun. And you can see how much that changes our image a little bit here. Close out of that. And we can also crank up the brightness maybe of our environment so we get a lot more reflection coming through. And, you know, with the plastic glass, and this is looking pretty good. We're getting pretty dang close. You can see that we're getting that haziness. It's looking a lot more plastic glass and not just normal clear glass. So I'm liking that. But we can always, again, we can keep tweaking the subsurface scattering. We can also, we don't have to be married to this refraction here. So we can crank this up if we want to. Crank it up if we want to. And you can kind of see what's going on here. So that kind of, you know, with that increase of the refraction, that's also pumping up the reflection as well. So you may or may not like that. You can also kind of change the color, and you can see how just barely moving this color chip up here really changes how hazy this looks. So just touching it just a tiny bit really is changing how much cloudiness is in there, or how much specular is actually coming through as well in the reflection. So we can go way high, we can go maybe like 1.2 even, and you can even see in this preview how much more that kind of distorts, or how much less it distorts. So now we're not getting too much distortion at all, and we're not looking very close to that original image. So we'll bring this back up again. Bring up the brightness of our reflection. Let's see. Make this a blue. We can make this more blue. Oh, and another thing I wanted to show is this path length. You can actually, with the single scattering turned on, we can actually change the color that is represented in that subsurface scattering. So the light that's kind of gonna eke through. So we can make this a little bit more blue looking by adjusting, like really cranking up this blue level. You can see that updating here. So we can make these look a little bit more bluish, because I feel like this tube looks pretty blue. I don't know if that's just the environment or the lights, but we can definitely manually go into our subdivision or subsurface scattering and adjust that in there. We can again adjust our fall off. In the transparency here, you can actually adjust the reflection strength in the actual transparency channel. So maybe bring down the transparent, or the reflection helps a little bit. Good, good, good. Right now I'm just kind of messing with the color channel brightness and the color of the transparency, just to try to get more of a haze. You can see that's just very finicky. You just move this just a tiny bit and it just really can blow out the image. So I'm thinking that looks pretty dang close. Pretty dang close. Alright, so I'm going to wrap this up here and just kind of rehash what we, just kind of go back and talk about what we did. So, actually, no, not yet. We got one more thing. This looks pretty dang flat. Let's go and add our ambient occlusion and bring down the ray length a little bit and make this like a light grayish blue. Alright, now as that is applied to our project, now let's talk. Alright, so what did we do here? We recreated this cool Pixego composition here, these mini machines. We explored how to get plastic textures, the easy way, and then also how to get a glass plastic texture by jumping in here, jumping into the subsurface scattering here, and really having and playing around with all these options in here, and how they affect your glass and how it can make it a little bit more plasticky and gel looking. And then again, another important thing is just the lighting in your scene, and as always, having, with reflections, you always need an environment to reflect, so it's always important to have your HDR. But yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed this tutorial. If you have any questions, be sure to hit me up in the comments. And as always, I really appreciate you guys watching, and I'll see you in the next tutorial. Bye, guys.